Hey, this is Rob, and this is episode 79 of the Folly Coffee Podcast. Let's get it brewing.
1, 2, 3, 4.
I am here with Whistler and Zach of Hippo Campus. Nearly 2.5 million listeners on Spotify, hundreds of millions of streams out of St. Paul, Minnesota. You may have seen them on South by Southwest, Lollapalooza, Bonnaroo, or on Conan. Hippo Campus holds. Don't worry, that voice doesn't stay the entire episode.
Gotcha. So I love it though. It's enthusiastic.
I wanted to give a backstory into my introduction to Hippo Campus because it holds a pretty special place in Folly history. Jeff introduced me to you when we first met, and right when he introduced me to Hippo Campus, I downloaded Bambi onto my phone. We figured out that when we packaged coffee out in Silver Lake, we didn't get any internet reception via the phone. So the only album we had to listen to during like 8-9 hour packaging sessions was Bambi. And so I became very quickly familiar with the band. And then Whistler, I believe you met Jeff at a sampling. And he was like, oh, yeah, we totally supply coffee for bands going on tour because I did it for my friends that have a band. We're like, yeah, that's totally a thing. And so we sent you off with a bunch of coffee, and just a wild moment in Folly history. So super pumped to have you both on the podcast today remotely here. Appreciate taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having us, man. It's crazy.
Yeah, I remember. Sorry, what was the name? Jeff.
Yeah. Some people call him Coffee Jesus because of his beautiful long hair.
Yeah, he had super long hair. I was like looking through the coffee aisle at Kowalski's and was like, what do I want to do? And I knew that there was some sampling going on. And then he did his job. He walked on over and was like,
he's probably like, hey man,
try our coffee.
Probably try this coffee.
You should we got some free samples. And I was like, sure. And then I think he mentioned that he recognized it. And I was like, oh, that's tight. It was like not the first thing, it was like it was a really good introduction to you guys. And then I was like, sweet. And then and I knew my crew would, more than anything, the crew appreciates the coffee.
A good cup of coffee.
Yeah, that's the way they can survive through the day.
But I was like, what a beautiful moment where we've been fueled by your music while packaging. And Jeff and I really bonded over because we didn't know each other previous to these long packaging sessions. And so we just had Bambi on repeat playing this. And it was such a cool time at the beginning of Folly history. And so it's like, this is another weird full circle moment for me to be like, oh, this is so dope having him on the podcast. This is another one of those moments where I go, what the hell are you guys doing here? But to get to your story and away from the small Folly stuff with Hippo Campus, but the music industry to me is one that is very confusing. It is very complicated. There are so many different things that go into it. And I know a little bit about your story just from I've read online, just listening to your music, and honestly, just like talking to friends about experiences. I was just talking with Matt over from the Food Under Fire podcast, and he said that he actually booked you for a gig at UW Stout way back in the day.
I know the name. I remember the name. Is that Wisconsin?
Yeah. So UW Stout, he booked you for there.
The UW part, Stout. I'm trying to remember if that was the outside thing.
No, I think that was River Falls, but Stout, I'm trying to remember.
Was it? Yeah. Well, this is us being like, which of the shows was that?
Here, we'll get a picture.
We have UW Stout. I think that might have been the one where there was like the donuts, that's donut stand outside.
The details you remember about it?
I think that was River Falls.
No, there was this campus. We played, we had a comedian open for us, I think.
That's hilarious.
I think that was Stout.
Your classic college gig where they're just like booking anything and everyone for any sort of like the school friendly accounts.
That looks, remember we like hung out in the courtyard a bunch?
Yeah, but
I think it's that school, but maybe it's not that school.
That looks.
We've played a handful of like Wisconsin colleges, so it's kind of all.
Do you remember when this was? I know that food court.
Yeah, I know the food court. I think it's the one when Nate was he was like our first show with us, the guy who has picked coffee up from you before. Yeah. This was like one of our first shows with him actually, which is a wild connection there. But
it's just so funny that like everywhere I turn, like I just mentioned, I was like, oh, I've actually got Whistler and Zach coming on today. He's like, oh, I've booked them for a gig. And I'm like, it's such a small world, but I wanted to get to just like, how did you all get to where you are today? And because I believe you got your start back in 2013. You all went to high school together. Is that right?
Mm,
Correct.
yeah.
So how quickly into starting the band was it like, I don't know how to put this. Is it like, when did it become something you were doing for fun at the beginning to like, holy shit, I think we're like kind of starting to become real here?
Yeah, that distinction probably came when we started like like making serious life changes. Like
Hmm.
Whistler was gonna go to school in Hawaii, and he was like, "Fuck it, I'll just stay here for the band." And we had like played like 10 shows at that point, so you weren't very committed
Yeah.
to going to college either way.
I mean, it was right out of I had just graduated high school. So it wasn't, yeah, it was still fun at that time. I mean, it is still fun, but it was still like mostly just the mindset of like, this is for fun and like, why not? Like take a chance. But like, you don't really think, you know, you have dreams and hopes, but you never like expect to be in this position where now we're
Right.
talking. We love your coffee because you guys love our music. And it's just all this, you know, it's like, um, but yeah, it took us, I don't know, it was probably, we started playing together in 2013, and then probably about a year into that, I feel like, of us just kind of being in Minneapolis, working day jobs, doing shows every other weekend. And I, I think it just, there started to be a little bit, you know, we would burn some CDs of like some homemade demos we'd make, and they would all be gone by the end of the night.
And
At,
half of the CDs were bunk. They like didn't even.
work.
There's like a different thing on them.
What
And
was
that,
what was the creative process like when you all started? Because I know that like the thing I really like about your music is I really like music where like if I hear a few different songs, you don't even know it's the same band some of the time. And that's what was so great about your latest album, Bambi, is like the writing and the music style was so all over the place, but in awesome different ways. And so I'm curious, when you first got started, it's like where you're at now. What is that creative process like as you go? Do you have a song in mind that you're looking to write? How do all these songs that you come up with? What is that process like when you're beginning?
Yeah. I mean, when it started, when we were like just out of high school, we would just like get up and jam. Like Nathan, the guitar player, would probably show up with a riff or something, and then we would just like jam on that and try to flesh it out. Sort of like, we call it like vomiting. Just write, like just have a lot of stuff going on, and then you kind of like clean it up. You sort of organize that. But since then, since like our first record, we've been like getting into production and like learning how to record ideas. So that changed the creative process quite a bit, because we were going from like doing it all live in a room together into like sort of individually on our computers. And we're all pretty proficient now in like sort of making our own like ideas, and you know, having a palette where it's like, oh, that's what it's going to sound like. So now we kind of like flesh these ideas out more so, when it's just us like on the computer, and then we bring them back to the room and then open it up from there. But yeah, I don't know.
yeah, there's definitely a little more work involved, I think. Now, early on, it's like that honeymoon phase where it's like just so easy and like everything flows, and you're just, you can't help but just write and write and write, and everything is basically accepted and wanted, and it's all very innocent. And now it's in a space where it's like there's a purpose, there's a reason, we have to, you know, there's thinking behind it, and then there's also still trying to like maintain that innocence and like that flow of I don't know, just not thinking, not overthinking, I guess. But also, just to touch back, like in the early days, it was like we recorded stuff in my dad's basement, and it was like we were producing it, but it was like, this is the first time I've ever opened up this software.
Yeah,
And
it would
like
be like us
touched
trying to
them.
roast coffee.
Yeah, yeah. And then we just kind of stopped on that for a while, but now we're back at it. It's kind of full circle now. So it's, and I'd like to think we now know how to roast coffee. So
No, not a roast coffee.
So you start as a band in 2013. You start booking shows. How do you are you even booking shows when you first start? Because that's something that's so foreign to me that I go, how do you go from forming a band to playing a show in the first place?
yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, we had a couple bands before Hippo where it's like we cut our teeth on like, oh, you know, getting a show that was the dub, that was the win. So like what you do is you just email a venue when you could play a show. Like, hey, we got this band, our friends are gonna come out. You'll sell like 8 tickets and no one's gonna buy a drink because they're not of age. So like venues
It's a pretty
weren't into it.
compelling offer.
Yeah, no, they weren't not. They were like, they were like, we can't really put you on the stage because then we're gonna lose money. So we had to like, we just played a lot of house shows, and then some venues would like let us in if it was an all ages thing, and they could actually like earn their keep with just ticket sales. But you know, we just kept booking our own shows. We'd like email people and like get our other friends' bands to like make a bill, and then we'd go to a venue and say like, let's do this, and they would be down half the time. I don't know like when it changed. I guess you know, we booked this one show at, it used to be called, what is it? The one by Fine Line. It's the same venue, it's just the name changed.
It used to be called Mill City
That's
Nights.
what it is. Yeah.
Now it's called like Minneapolis Music Hall or something like
Hmm.
that.
And it was like a pay to play sort of thing. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
you can play our venue if you buy all these tickets and sell them to your friends, which makes it sucks. Like they suck for doing that, but I understand why.
They
Yeah.
have to. They have to make some money
Yeah,
somehow.
there's no
Yeah.
guarantee that they can keep the door open with you know, bands that don't have a following. So like we did that. We like sold all of these tickets to our friends and family. And then that was like a decent show, but there was like this lighting guy who ran lights for Trampled by Turtles, another local band, and he was like, you guys are really great, I'll introduce you to this management team. And we were like, no, please don't do that, please don't, like you look so scary. He had like 3 strands of long hair. And we avoided him for a long time, but he was like persistent, so he flagged us down. He's like, okay, I want to talk to you guys, let's do this thing. And he was like, I got a practice space, let's get you the practice space. And we're like, fine, okay, if you get it off our backs. And then he introduced us to this management team, and they started like helping us like book shows, and they're like, okay, we'll get you some good record, like we'll do the studio thing, and then you record these songs, and then we can book some shows. And that's kind of how it took off at the beginning. But
Yeah, and that guy ended up working for us for like, I don't know, it's been like 6 years or
Yeah.
something.
yeah, he ran.
the guy,
crazy.
the guy that you didn't even want to talk to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Would he be offended if he heard this? If that's how you described him, or does
No,
he
we-
know that about himself?
Right,
at this
Oh,
he knows that about
We've
himself.
ripped into him.
And so is that how you were able to get set up for the recording of your first album?
Not through him specifically, but because of the management. As soon as we signed with the management team, then like everything changed. It was like we no longer like took charge and book. It was like within the first couple of months we had a tour booked, and we had some money coming in, and we signed with our label for the EPs that we had. And then it was like, okay, now we go to the studio and you do this thing. And after the first maybe year of touring, we were able to like get into the studio for Landmark and start cranking that out.
I'm curious, just from like the side of management, when they come to you, what is like their pitch that they're telling you, like why they want to work with you, or this whole thing? Because music is such a competitive landscape. It's sometimes really frustrating. I don't listen to the radio much, but every once in a while when I'm driving around delivering, I'll listen to it. And you hear some of the music on radio and you just go like, how did this get on the radio when there's that out there that nobody knows about? So I'm curious, as the management's coming to talk to you, what they're telling you of like why they want to work with you, or what like the allure is for them.
Right. I mean, like with anything, there's this range of like where you can sort of operate. And we were tiny, but like we had our shows playing in Minneapolis, so we weren't like attracting like universal management.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
It's not like the big guys came out. It was like this really cool like group of dudes, like, oh, you know, we like small music. Like they managed Trampled, and they were managing Lizzo at the time. So the first time we met them, like we met at the Depot, like that bar by First Ave, and Lizzo was walking out, we were walking in, we were like meeting them for the first time. Like, what is this? I don't know. And they were like, we just want to like help you, sort of like, I don't know even what they said. We were like, we weren't impressed. We were like, cool, that's awesome.
Yeah, I think we were more just, I don't know. We were in a weird state of mind too, because it's like, oh, there's people outside like they want to take pictures with us. So we were just kind of like, we're the shit, you know, like there was at least I remember that feeling of this kind of like, yeah, these guys are here to talk to us, but it took us a minute to like you know, we were a little too jaded for
Well,
the moment.
we
I
didn't
think.
know what like a management like because we'd been
Yeah.
approached by like management before. It was just like a website and a dude who's like, "I'll rep your catalog online," and it's like nothing. So
Yeah.
we were like, "I don't know if this is real." But what did they say? They were like, "We think you're great. We want to like, you know, I don't even know what management is. Like, well, we'll just help you.
Yeah,
Like,
it
we'll
was
just help
just
you."
it was just helping us, which they did like before we even signed. They spent like 3 months doing stuff for us, kind of as this like
Yeah.
not even as a handshake. It was just like we're gonna do this stuff to show you that we're worth it, and also like you guys are so young. Like obviously you're not, and we were to be honest, we were. It was good that we weren't under that pressure or that feel like we weren't the type to just like sign away right away, but they're not the type to try to get that out of us. They were the type to
Yeah,
yeah, I
like
don't
I
even
said,
think
it's
we're
like
answering the
we're
question.
we're
It's
just like
like
it was like such a low key thing that it
Yeah.
wasn't like, oh, we're gonna lose everything after this,
Yeah.
or it's
Yeah,
like
because you hear the horror stories of
Yeah.
like management or record deals where a band early on signs a deal just for the sake of, getting the big promises. And so that's what I was curious about, of like how you vetted that out or what was happening. It's interesting that they were like helping you out for a few months. So you're like, oh, this is pretty legit, as opposed to somebody reaching out and be like, sign on the dotted line right now, or you're going to never be anything.
yeah, it's weird that like it's not talked about more how many like good people there are that actually just want to help.
yeah,
It's like no one is like trying to take advantage, or no one tried to take advantage of us like
yeah,
realistically. But there's like people that are just really genuine, like, hey, I want to help you out. Like, let's see if we can do this. You know,
it's
but-
not just Scooter Bronze everywhere who are like managing
yeah,
and
you
just
can't
like
play your own music live.
yeah, like doing it's nothing like that. And each manager, we've had these conversations in the last year or two with other managers as we were looking for some new management, and just like it was interesting to see what all these different people could bring to the table and how they brought it to the table. And it's yeah, so in the end also like each manager has a different road that they want to bring you down with a similar end goal, but it's always a different path. And so it ends up being up to you if you want to like try to go down that path with them or not.
Yeah. So you got your first album and you're starting the tour. What are the gigs and like the venues that you're playing on these first tours that you're going on?
Very small. Well, like before that, it was just like whatever we could book outside of the state. So I think we played at what was Julia's school?
Beloit.
Beloit. We like booked our intro at Beloit. That was horrible. The sound guy was throwing up before our show.
That was great.
What else? Either way,
that wasn't a part of his creative process for sound check.
No, we just really turned him off.
Yeah.
Didn't like us.
And that's like, and there was another one that was somewhat similar, it was almost a little better, but was that Iowa? I don't know which school.
What is it? Iowa City
Iowa
or Des Moines?
State?
I think it was Des
in
Moines.
Des Moines. But both those shows were just kind of like the school has this little venue and you're playing. Jake's and Zach and Nathan are standing in front of people that are like 3 feet from them and they're all at the same level. You're just like in this room playing to 20 people or 30.
That was pretty much the first tour. But when we got management, they introduced us to this booking agency who we're super fortunate to meet. They're great. And they were like, okay, our business is to put bands in venues, and that means touring. So like you guys need to go on tour. So what they do for bands of our caliber, like really low key, sort of just starting out, they like put you on an opening bill. So we were opening for this band called the Mowgli's, and that was like our first thing, and that was like probably a month and a half. And we were so excited, we didn't even know what touring was supposed to be. And looking back, that was like it was like the most grueling. Like if we had to do it again, we would probably die. But it was like a month and a half from March to like the end of April, where we were just in our little van with like 5 people and all of our gear and just couch surfing because we didn't have the money to pay for hotels. So we were just like asking all of our friends and our parents' friends. They're like, hey, we need to crash on your couch in San Antonio next week.
But how are people in your life like perceiving what you all are doing? Because I'm sure there's a point where some people are looking at it being like, are you sure it's worth the time? Like you're all traveling in a van doing what? Or is it the fact that you've got a management company, you're touring? Was it more excitement than otherwise?
Everyone was excited. Your dad lost his mind. He was
Yeah.
like so into it.
Well, that
He,
was
like,
the bet that him and I, like my family made, was like, let's bet on you not going to school and this working out. And once you sign, there's like this feeling of like, yes, everything's good, which it could all end tomorrow, like still, and you never know what could happen. But like, I think there is a general vibe of like, whoa, like everything's good. Like everything, like everybody in my work was like freaking out, like, because it just is something that you don't.
when you worked at Kowalski's.
Yeah, when I worked at Kowalski's, that's when we signed to this label and we got this touring thing, and then I never had to go back. And
Yeah, but our family and friends were super supportive.
super.
That's
My
awesome.
dad is like still sort of like hoping I go back to school. But he's very proud. He's like, oh, you make it so fun to, like, because he gets to travel and see us for his work and whatever. But he's like, this can't last, right?
Just keep the school thing in the back. Like, keep that common application filled out.
Yeah. No, seriously, like I'm still deferred from like U of M, I think. But no, everyone was super supportive. I think no one really knew what was happening or what was going to happen. It was like, this is fun. Let's just do this. And then it just kind of like, we just kept booking tours and kept playing until literally like last year when we couldn't.
Yeah. So what was that like as you're booking more tours, playing more shows? How did the attendance change as you go on? Are you finding that people know who you are before you show up? Are you doing more openers? But that's the crazy thing to me is when like 2013 doesn't seem like that long ago.
Mhm.
It kind of is now, which
Definitely.
sadly, that's when I graduated college. So I'd like to think it wasn't that long ago, but it's kind of not that short ago either. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, as you're building over the past 7 or 8 years, like how does each tour change as you go forward? Is it a linear growth, or is there a moment where like things just started to pop?
It seemed very like, I don't know. It seemed pretty like non-linear because it's like we did this opening thing for the Mowgli's in 2015. And then we did South by, did our first little record deal. And then like our first like headlining tour was like that fall, I think, where it was like just a month, like a little bit less than a month. We were in a van just doing tiny venues, like 300 cap. And none of them were like packed, like none of them sold out or anything. And we were like, this is awesome. Like we were doing headline touring. It was so fun. We thought we were killing it. And then we just kept opening for people. Like we did, we opened for Walk the Moon for a little bit. We opened for Modest Mouse.
We were in the UK for a little bit, did some Modest Mouse dates. That was all within that first
Opened for Junior
like summer of touring. It was a really intense summer, and then I think we tend to always take winters off, and then we started the whole Landmark process, and it was 2017 when that came out.
So we recorded it
We
2016.
recorded it through 2016, going out on, I think we probably did a couple more like headlining runs, and I don't really remember 2016 that much, but I just remember recording a lot. We spent a lot of time on the album. And I'm sure that fall, I think that next fall before Landmark came out, we did like we opened for Junior. And it just was like getting our chops up, or touring chops up, doing all this stuff. And then when Landmark came out, there was enough hype and stuff behind everything that we were able to like kind of level up our experience on touring. And we were in a bus, and it was definitely, that's when it like started to feel a little different. I mean, a lot different in terms of like we get to sleep, like on a bus, as opposed to get 5 hours of sleep in a hotel every night. But even then, I feel like it was near the end of the Landmark cycle where things started to really kind of be different.
Yeah, we could like sell out a show. That would be cool. And then,
yeah.
But I think it was like a slog for the first 2 years of like,
For sure.
we're in a van, then we got a van and trailer, and that was awesome. And then we got the cheapest bus we could find, and we thought it was like
the greatest.
We were royalty. It was so cool. But it was like falling, like our bunks like flooded and like
it's bad.
But yeah, it was pretty like sort of like that, or looking back, it was slow, and then it started to take off. And this past year's kind of felt like it's hard not to feel like you're just treading water when you're not like touring. So it's like kind of just twiddling our thumbs, like, okay, what's gonna, like, we're hoping that we can play shows
Yeah.
by fall, and then hopefully tour next year or something like that. But
And what's it like been since March of 2020 because your most recent tour off of the Bambi album, when did that tour end? Were you at all affected when things closed down, or was that tour was pretty wrapped up by then, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
we were fortunate enough to like have done like a lot of our. So Bambi came out in
Crazy.
2018,
Yeah.
and 2018, and then we just toured all of 2019. So we'd like done the whole big thing and finished that up in like October of 2019, and then we had sort of planned 2020 was like a recording year. We would just write and record and do some like little shows. But yeah, your birthday was like
the day?
March 13th.
Yeah,
Everything
my
shut
birthday's
down.
March 13th, which is turned into the day that the country
Yeah,
shut
that
down.
week was like everyone knew it was
Yeah.
like time to pack up.
Yeah.
But we were recording at the time and just working on album, like our next stuff. But yeah, extremely fortunate that we happened to have these last 6 years lead up to 2020 being an off year for us.
Right.
Don't
Like you can't
tour.
write it any better than that in terms of planning out how you're gonna tour versus write. And
Sure.
how has your writing and recording been affected with everything that's going on?
It was pretty affected. Well, luckily we started all of that like February last year, so we were able to get a solid like month of work in, which is a lot of what we're hoping to be able to use. But
Our producer was pregnant with their first kid for the time in that spring of 2020. So like when everyone shut down, he was like very like, we can't meet up. I'm not going to risk it. Let's just like work separately. So then we tried like sending ideas back and forth, and that took like a while to figure out like how to do that effectively, but we kind of got that down. And then we kind of started to open up like our quarantine circles, so we would like get together, just like two of us or three of us, and then work on that. And that worked out for a while, but
now we're kind of fully back in it. We have our own space now that we can record, and so it's we can kind of somewhat maintain a bubble, and everybody just wears masks, and the four of us are always near each other, so it's less of like a mask situation. But
Yeah.
Caleb specifically, he's almost always got one on, and it's now it's kind of everybody was anxious, like way more anxious than they still may be now.
Now it's just that like really cool underlying anxiety that's just always there that we're all just kind of used to, and it's just a really neat feeling that we all have all the time.
Yeah. No, it's super cool.
Wild.
I've just learned that over the past 12 months to just not ask like, hey, how are you doing? It's just more just like assumed like, hey, we all know how we're doing. Let's move on to the next point of conversation here.
Yep.
Totally.
Keep on keeping on.
So right off the success of Bambi, I'm curious, as you've grown a following and the streams increase and the show followings increase, does that change how you feel as you're prepping for a new album? Does that place any pressure on the writing process of like, does it change how you're thinking of the writing process of like who you're writing for or anything like that?
Not personally. Like I know that we all sort of deal with it a little differently. But it's never been like, oh, they're gonna hate. I mean, I guess so. Sometimes there's like a song where it's like they're gonna hate that.
Yeah.
And then
Still
someone's like really into it. And then
so let's say you have a song like that, right? You record it and you're like, they're gonna hate this. Does that influence your decision of keeping it on an album or not?
Yeah, and it could be me who is like, I just don't know about this one, and that could end up being the reason that it doesn't get put out, and whether it was the right choice or not. But that's what I'm kind of talking about, where like early on it was like anything is good, and now it's like still kind of that, but there's still, we have to think about it a little more.
it's just a democrative process where it's like, okay, if someone's like really, really not into this, we kind of have to take that into consideration, but it's still like a majority wants this. So like they're gonna have to sort of be cool with that. And we've all been in that chair where it's like, this is it. This is where we pack up. Like this song sucks so bad. Like we're gonna have to go back to college or something.
Yeah.
But thankfully we haven't gotten there. But
that's just us being super like hypercritical too. It's just how it is. You can't not be that way. And it's all such a personal experience, whether you're like, I write the song or not. it still like represents me, and it represents Zach, and it represents the four of us as a group, but also as an individual. And our the ego can get in the way sometimes of that process as well. But the fans are something that we definitely keep in mind, but it's also something that I think, at least for myself, I've had to practice, keeping them in mind, but also trusting in them and believing that they're here for not what they need specifically, and more for what we can provide sometimes, and what we just like, what we enjoy creating. Like, it started with us just creating what we loved and what we like, and that's what people liked. It wasn't people being like, we want this, and so give us this.
That's a lot of the songs on the radio, it seems.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the formula that you're talking
Yeah.
about, kind of, to an extent. It,
Yeah.
it it varies, but like that is something that exists in the world, where it is very curated and built for this demographic, where we have a demographic for sure, but it's a little more natural. And I think it's really easy to get caught up in thinking about it, like just thinking about not thinking about yourself more in the picture, um, because you don't want to disappoint. You don't want to let down. You don't want to let these people down and like release something and have it tank. You want to like do good. And so it's just a matter of like being able to trust the fans, but also being able to trust yourself, um, which just to me, go very much hand in hand.
Yeah, and then hopefully, like especially as you become more established, it does almost grant you more like permission from the fans that like you're not going to lose a fan that's been a fan for 7 years now, or for even just a few years, with one song that they go, this one's not for me, but I've liked them for so long, that's not going to all of a sudden change my opinion of them. But I was reading on your most recent album that the writing process changed a bit, where it became a little bit more individualistic to try to like increase the personal nature of the lyrics. And I think that shined through pretty. It's like it was very clear on Bambi that these songs seem to be deeply personal. Did that change that process as you're bringing a song forward? Because I would have to imagine it would be a pretty vulnerable proposition that you go, here's a song that I really dove into myself to write. Do you like it? And to have someone maybe go, hey, thanks for sharing your innermost feelings through music. I hate it. It shouldn't go on the album.
Yeah, that's par for the course. Like
Can feel like that
even
for
before
sure.
Bambi, it's like, I love this thing that I made and I think it's really cool. Let's work on it. And they're like, that's garbage. Like that shouldn't, like that'll stay dead forever. And that hurts, but like that's kind of like what you expect. It's like, oh, you don't like it, that's cool. And it's like, okay, I'll just put that away. But with the emotional thing, we're all typically trying to be as vulnerable with each other as we can, where it's like, I need to like share how I feel right now, and I hope you can hear me when I say it, and you treat me well. It's like we're not trying to disrespect each other. It's just, this sort of conversation that has to happen emotionally versus creatively, and then the marriage of the two. But even now with this last record, it's like even more personal and more vulnerable. It's like, well, you're really saying that right now. And it's like, cool, no, I support you. Like, and it's like you said, individualistic, where it's like you kind of, even if it's a far shot from your personal experience, like I kind of like, we support each other in that. It's like, I trust you, like take the lead on that. Like that's your bag, and I'm, I'll let that represent me, but it's your thing, and I'll ride for it. So
because it's got to be an interesting dynamic having a band with friends all the way back to high school, because it's like, even friends of mine I've had since high school, people change as they grow, and especially as you guys are put in this absolute pressure cooker of touring, and so you're around each other constantly, that it's so cool to see what you have been able to do and how the music has progressed and changed. And so I'm curious, with your approach to this new album, do you look at like your previous albums and say, we need this to be totally different, we need to shock and awe, or is it just more of a fluid process and like evolution of the music along the way?
That's a good
I'd
question.
say more fluid. It's not like, oh, it's third quarter, we need to diversify like product. It's just like, our tastes change, like you said. We just keep, everyone changes as you grow and time goes on. So our preferences change. It's like, oh, I like this type of music. That's kind of how I want to express this right now. And that's how like, you know, the production changes with our records. It's like, oh, this is, you know, just how this manifested because of like what we like. So this, you know, last record is like sort of self-produced, but with our buddy Caleb. So it's like very direct, like, oh, we're controlling this knob and we want it to express that. So it's not like we want to change. It's just that, like, that's how we're changing. And it's hopefully all with the right intention of just sort of reflecting a preference, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think we, at least whenever we've like set off on the process of making a new album, like for this last process, we don't sit down and like listen to the old stuff and go like, what should we, like what don't we like about how it sounds? It's more of like, what didn't we like about the feeling of the process? What did we like about the feeling? Like, what did we like about the process? It's less about the sonic experience. And so we go into it with like desires based on feelings, really, of like how things went prior, on like the prior process. And it's interesting because it's not only until like just this last week where we were working on some like stream stuff, video stuff, and we were running all the old Landmark and Bambi songs that we like haven't played. And I listened to the albums and I was like, whoa, this is like so weird. And it's the first time I had like really listened to it in a long time. You always, sometimes we catch them in coffee shops and it's just like, it's the distant, you don't like really listen to it. And so it's, yeah, I don't know. It just makes me think like, I know that someday we'll probably, once we do the next album, we'll look back on this album that we're working on now and have a similar feeling of being like, huh, that's what we did. Like, why did we do that? Or like, wow, this is super thin sounding. Like, it's very, like we want more, but we never start the process of an album being like, that didn't have any bass or low end or like was too sparkly. Let's not do that. It's just more of like, I don't want to go through that again, or like I want to write differently this time. Or
such a trippy thought to know that you're writing an album that you in 5 to 10 years may look back on it and pick it apart.
Yeah,
And but you're making it at like, when you're making it at the moment, you're like, this is exactly how I want this to be. And then it's like the thought experiment that I heard recently where it's like, if you could try to imagine yourself in 20 years giving yourself advice, what do you think that advice will be? And so it's like, it's such a trippy thought to like know that you will continue to progress, and that in a weird way it's like this is the pinnacle of progression for now. And so it's really cool to listen back on old albums and hear the progression of the music. I'm curious, on your side, as you're talking to your management company or venues, like it's February 16th right now, 21. What is the communication you're hearing on like any sort of hope of touring or what the potential landscape is? Because it seems like at this point, I had 2 tickets purchased before COVID, and I just get notifications about every 3 months that it's like, hey, it's postponed. It's like, okay, I think I'll see them in 2028 maybe. But I'm curious what you're hearing in terms of like the hopes of getting back to any form of like especially indoor live music, because we're in Minnesota, so it's like 6 months out of the year.
Yeah. The last conversation that we had was 2 hours ago, and they were like, if the vaccine rollout goes well, like venues are booking shows for fall, like across the country. Like these bands have had holds for months, and now they're actually like booking them, and tour announcements will start coming out within the next couple months from everyone you've heard of. But that's all hinging on like a perfect rollout from the vaccine across the country. So, best case scenario, there's going to be tours this fall. Realistic scenario, at least in my opinion, is next spring. Seems like a tour would happen, or the tours that every band has been planning will happen. So that'll be like an oversaturated couple months, but it'll be awesome for everyone to sort of like feel like they can.
It'll also
be
hopefully be an oversaturated demand of, because live music to me is like, yeah, of course I love it, but I didn't realize that I go, oh, if I don't have it, there's something wrong in my life. And like, so I'm hoping when things come back, it's just like, oh, there's a show every night this week. Like, okay, I don't need to sleep this week. That's fine. And so I was thinking about that all these tours that they were already planned out. Now they're starting to stack on top of each other. And then you have to factor in just, I mean, if there was one in the fall, you have to factor in, are people even emotionally ready, even if everyone is fully vaccinated? That, I mean, you talk to people and they go, I'm watching a movie that was filmed 5 years ago. And when there's a crowd of people, I get a little nervous just seeing it on the screen. So there's like that thought too. But I mean, I'm at the point where you go, if a vaccine gets me into the show, like, I don't cut my arm off. I'll come in. If that's what it takes to get to see the show, it's like, let's go. And so it'll be interesting to see that. And are they giving you any insight into like potential procedures or like what they're so it's pretty much just like fall seems like it could be hopeful. Hopefully that's when it comes out, and then we'll just play it by ear until then.
Yeah, it's very loose. It's very not guaranteed, obviously, and just like it's extremely hopeful. It's and optimistic.
I mean, it's like it's on paper, right? Like these vaccines will be distributed, people will be vaccinated. There's, science that says herd immunity will be effective. But like you said, it's like I can't see it in my head. Like I don't, if I saw a group of people in a venue, like even everyone had a mask on, everyone was vaccinated, I would still be like, I'm not, I don't feel cool about like hanging out here. So I think there's going to be like a slower process even after everyone's vaccinated of like that emotional recovery where it's like I can be in a room and like take my mask off, like, and it's cool, and like I'm not going to feel ashamed or like pressured in any way.
Yeah. And that's it's so tough because live music is really like kind of the final step to like we're back. And so it's almost like every other thing has to come back before live music is a thing again. And that's kind of the tough part is like you see restaurants rolling out and cutting back and rolling out and cutting back, and hopefully it moves forward and the numbers seem to be looking good. But that's a definite thought. But fall seems really hopeful, and unfortunately that pure underlying anxiety I was talking about earlier is like fall. Okay, yeah, sure. Like, just getting ready to get my heart broken again. But it is exciting to hear, at least, that you are able to be in a recording year already. Has the emotion of the last 12, 13 months affected how this album is developing?
Totally. There's a lot of, just like reflective songs where it's like, oh, that's really boring and sad. But it's like, I don't know, the feeling of like how fast a year moves kind of, I don't know, before this, it was like every year was like a month, and it was like, that's done now. Now this year it's felt like 10 put together. So it's like, I don't know, time feels slower. So I think we're just being more patient, but, like you said, like everyone's ready to go have a good time. Like if we can feel that way inside. So it's like, I don't know if it's true, but I saw something that was like the Roaring 20s came after the Spanish flu. It's like there's the pandemic then, and then everyone had this social sort of influx of energy where it's like, I want, let's celebrate. And then God forbid there's a war, but there was the same energy after the world wars where it's like everyone just felt like being together because they couldn't, and there was such a stress. So hopefully like that emotional pressure is like sort of released, and like it can sort of be a really cool couple years after this where we want to have that energy back.
Yeah, and it's crazy for us too, because like he was saying, a month felt like a year to us, or a year felt like a month, and like is just due to the fact that we were never home. We were home for maybe 3 to 4 or 5 months out of the year, and so for the first time, we were gearing up for being home from the majority of the 2020, but still like the fact that I personally haven't been on a plane for over a year, which is insane because we usually are flying a dozen times or more every year, more than that for sure. And like last year we would have done that. We would have flown to a bunch of different colleges and festivals or whatever. And it's wild to stay put, which, like all of our friends who don't tour with us or don't tour at all, they are used to this feeling. So it's kind of like wild to be home and to to have to experience that for the first time in like 5 or 6 years. And I think that's part of our energy too, is like we have gotten so used to not being home. Even like I'm a huge homebody. I love being home, but there is a part of me that's like that knows there's some excitement to come from just even traveling, like just going to Montana and back or something, just getting in a car and driving for a couple hours is exciting to me. So I think I don't know. I know I'm ready for it. I'm ready for
Yeah.
the experience to like just get on a plane and feel comfortable and like travel somewhere and just
I mean,
do
it's at the
something.
it's at the point where I had a dream a couple weeks ago where I was at a live show and nobody was wearing masks, and I walked up to somebody. I was like, "What's going on?" And they're like, "You didn't hear? It's gone." And I was
Yeah.
like, "What do you mean? It's gone." So we're all good. And like, I woke up with this feeling that was so happy, but
Bummer.
then realized it was a dream. And it was like, okay, someday that feeling will be back, hopefully. But it's been such a rough year. But that is the hope, the roaring 20s, that like this appreciation for restaurants and live music and any sort of event will be so amplified after the fact that like I know personally live music, I'll never take that for granted again. If anyone ever asks you down for the show tonight, the answer will always be yes. And so but I really appreciate the time you both took today. Your music absolutely fucking rips. Like, I'm so pumped Jeff introduced me to you. You were like, obviously in 2018 and 19, the most listened to album on Spotify for me because of our packaging sessions mostly. But it's funny to think that like the timing of Folly with knowing Hippo Campus aligns almost perfectly. So I can like think of these big moments in our business that like align for some reason with like specific songs on the album because I was listening to it so consistently. And so it's like really bizarre to even be talking even remotely here today. And so really appreciate your time and cannot wait to see when that new album comes out. Do you have any sort of a timeline in place, or is it kind of contingent on when you're able to tour with it?
Yeah, it's very up in the air right now, but hopefully, within a year. I don't know. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't want to give too much away.
Yeah, isn't that kind of is the strategy kind of when you release an album that you want to have a tour backed up behind it
Yeah.
right when it's released? Is that kind of the deal?
Yeah, I mean, a bunch of our buddies in music and just huge artists that everyone looks at, they released albums like this past year, and from like the people that we know who were like working around those records, they were like, that's great, it was great that we did it, it's a great record, but like we couldn't tour, and like the engagement that you would hope to see in normal times was nothing like compared to now, where it's like people are having a tough time like accessing that stuff. So
Yeah, they're like in need of making another album for when touring comes back. Like they're going to be
Yeah.
doing a second, like a follow-up album way sooner than you would think if they're a band who like needs that.
It would also be rough having an album of yours tied to such a bleak time because I know sometimes I hear a song and I go, oh, it reminds me of this year. And even if it's a happy song, if it was not a happy time, it like makes me really sad.
yeah,
And so that would be an interesting part of the process too. But I'll leave it with that. Really appreciate both having you on. Can't wait for the new album. Hopefully a year from now we're talking and things are better and we're sending you off with more coffee on your next tour. So whenever you need more coffee, we got you hooked up every time. So hopefully we're talking about a year from now on getting you all the coffee you need to go on the next big tour with the album release.
Thanks so much for having us,
Yeah,
man.
thanks. Anytime.
Absolutely. Have a good rest of your day. And thanks again for coming on. It's been awesome.